On 5 News tonight, clearing the jungle migrant camp in Calais. Political frustrations about Brexit and those common medical treatments that might be useless. Thousands queuing Calais to be moved out before the bulldozers move in.
They're queuing for coaches that will take them to reception centres. No one knows exactly where they'll end up.
The Prime Minister tries to reassure the leaders of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland about Brexit, but not everyone is convinced. And a blood test for the menopause or an X-ray for some back pain. Those hospital treatments the experts say we don't really need. Also tonight, the families battling local authorities over the gender identity of their children. And the miracle baby who was born twice. Good evening, welcome to 5 News Tonight. I'm Matt Barbet. Thousands of people have now left the vast migrant camp in Calais as officials prepare to demolish it. 2,500 are expected to leave the jungle on buses by the end of today and be taken to reception centres across France, from where they can then apply for asylum. Those who refuse to leave the camp face being arrested or deported. So far, we hear the mood has remained calm, but there are fears that clashes will be seen like those at the weekend. Dominic Reynolds reports now from Calais.
Moving before dawn, carrying all they own. For the thousands of people here, stuck in a place they thought was a stepping stone to Britain, this may be the last jungle sunrise. The French authorities have decided this camp must close. As I walked with 25-year-old Bilal, he told me he's wanted to leave here for weeks.
But I don't know, in the north, east, west, I don't know.
Do you mind? Do you care?
Pardon?
Do you care where you go?
No.
You'll go anywhere?
Yes, anyway. Because I will stay here a long time. The weather is very bad for me because I come from Sudan.
Bilal joined a vast queue to book a spot on one of 60 coaches. For adults, this is the only official way out of here.
Most of the people in the Calais jungle have been on journeys thousands of miles long. The people in this queue are those that have agreed that their journey will finish in France. They're queuing for coaches that will take them to reception centres. No one knows exactly where they'll end up.
The pockets of trouble didn't last long. There are 1,200 riot police here, ensuring scenes being watched around the world don't look ugly. But after dark, it was different. Last night, police charged and fired tear gas, tools they've used many times to contain the edge of this camp. Abdul's lived with that violence for 9 months. He says going back to Afghanistan now isn't an option.
I'm like a 50-50. If I find a chance, okay, go UK. If not, I'm staying in France, claim asylum in the France.
Tomorrow you need to make a decision, no?
Yes, tonight. Tonight we make a decision with our all friends.
What will you decide?
Right now at this thing, so I think so like a 60% decided to stay.
60% stay somewhere in France.
France, yeah.
40% leave the camp.
Leave the camp to going to England.
And try getting on a lorry.
Yes.
But what about the hundreds of children here? Authorities say they're making special arrangements, but charities are worried some could just disappear. And exactly who Britain will help is a mystery to them.
Child will come to us and say, I've been offered a place on a bus to the UK. That's normally when we hear about it.
Do you understand the logic behind who's offered and who isn't?
Definitely not. There's definitely some very young children that I know, sort of 12 to 15 years of age, who have been here and still here, for sure. And talking to them, they have family in the UK.
They've closed camps here before, of course, but the people always kept coming. Governments on both sides of the channel now want these to be the last to make Calais their temporary home.
Dawn, what's the atmosphere like in what remains of the camp this evening?
Well, Matt, we went in about half an hour ago for the last time tonight, and it was certainly a place that felt like things were changing. People were burning pieces of shelter, glass was being smashed, and you might be able to see over my shoulder a portaloo's already been set fire to. If it's anything like last night, that's going to happen a lot more. There will be more fires, we anticipate, and plenty more riot police turning up to face that. Now, people were moved out today. The idea is that the bulldozers go in tomorrow. It was trouble-free today, but remember, those people queuing up were those that have chosen to leave, people who have packed their bags because they want to get out of this place and go to another part of France. Now, the big question, of course, will be exactly what happens tomorrow when the bulldozers go in and that camp has many people still in there who've chosen not to leave today. Now, the authorities have said they hope it will be peaceful, but they will use force, they say, if they have to.
Dom in Calais for us this evening. Many thanks indeed. Well, with me in the studio now is Zoe Gardner, once again, Communications Officer at Asylum Aid. And Zoe, you know what? It feels like we've been here before. We have the Songat Centre, which then got closed down to great fanfare. We now got the jungle, which is, you know, a makeshift camp, which is being bulldozed, as Dom explained there. Is this really going to solve the problem?
No, this is in no way a solution. It's very positive that at the 11th hour, our government has stepped in and finally taking a few very vulnerable children to safety in the UK. It's very positive that the French government has finally stepped up and at least found temporary spaces to accommodate, in theory, the number of people within the jungle. But just destroying a camp, just like just building a wall, you know, you can hide these people, but they won't go away. They won't disappear.
So where are they going to go to now? We hear about, again, as Dominic mentioned, some of them being bussed away to apply for asylum elsewhere.
Yeah, so the French government has set up temporary accommodation centres for the residents in a number of regions across France. So anybody who is cooperating with them on that is able to have housing, which is a great start because one of the reasons so many people ended up in the Calais jungle was that they attempted to apply for asylum in France and the French system in northern France was overwhelmed, didn't have the capacity to house them, not even unaccompanied children, and just left them destitute.
And another reason is perhaps Western governments, ours included, aren't dealing with the source of the problem
That's
enough.
Very true. I think that it's very, very true that we are not dealing with this as a structural issue that goes across Europe. So Calais is a small part of a wider catastrophe that's going on across Europe because we have failed to invest time and time again. You know, these temporary accommodation centres in France and these few children that we have in the UK, that's you know, a tiny fraction of money spent by those two states as compared to the amount that has been spent on fences and on tear gas and on these measures that haven't worked and that haven't made the problem go away.
Just briefly, Zoe, I mean, there was talk in the Cameron government, at least, of bringing in 20,000 child refugees directly from that part of the world where Syrians have fled to. Is that happening quickly enough?
So the 20,000, finally, again, we are getting some more movement on that. We reached the end of the first year without very many people having been brought in. But now it does seem that the government has managed to find local councils that are able to accommodate all 20,000 of those. So that does look like it's moving, but that is a drop in the ocean. It's simply not enough. And it only applies to Syrians. And we know perfectly well that people are fleeing for their lives from Afghanistan, from Sudan, from Eritrea, from various other countries. And there's no legal way. There's no pathway for those people. There's no queue to get safely to Europe.
Zoe, many thanks indeed. Good to see you again. Now, two police officers are in a serious condition after being deliberately hit by a car. The attack is being treated as attempted murder after they were hit responding to a call in Glasgow. The car was reversed into the male and female officers after they stopped it to talk to the occupants. A 25-year-old man has been arrested over a chemical incident that led to the evacuation of London City Airport. Dozens of passengers suffered breathing difficulties at the airport on Friday. The suspect's been released on bail until next month. And a British man has pleaded not guilty to the murders of two women in Hong Kong on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Rurik Jutting pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but that was rejected. Police found the bodies of two Indonesian women at his apartment in 2014. The Christian owners of a bakery have lost their legal appeal in a row over a cake supporting gay marriage. 2 years ago, the Asher's Baking Company in Belfast refused to bake a cake with a pro-gay marriage slogan, saying it was against their beliefs. Our chief correspondent, Tessa Chapman, has more.
In the only UK country where same-sex marriage isn't allowed, a row over this cake shows how far from consensus they are. At court today, the Christian bakers who believed they had a right to conscience, and the gay man, their customer, who felt he was the victim of discrimination. Today, a judge in Belfast ruled for the second time that Gareth Lee was right.
Relieved, but also very grateful to the Court of Appeal for the judgment.
It clarifies the law, and it means that anyone, whether you're straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, can walk in to receive a service without asking yourself the question, I wonder, do the views that I hold, religious, political views, or does my sexual orientation somehow conflict with those of the people that run this organisation or the service provision?
Asher's baker took the order for the cake and the payment. 2 days later, they called Gareth to say they couldn't make it after all because of their deeply held Christian beliefs. Today, the judge ruled making the cake wouldn't have meant they endorsed gay marriage equality.
We are extremely disappointed with today's ruling. If equality law means people can be punished for politely refusing to support other people's causes, then equality law needs to change.
The Asher's case has received international attention, hope for those who support a change to marriage laws, but an insight into a polarising issue. Tessa Chapman, 5 News.
Next, dozens of common medical treatments are of little or no use to patients, according to a group of senior doctors. The Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, no less, has made a list of 40 treatments as part of a campaign to reduce the number of unnecessary procedures. I'm joined now by our health correspondent, Catherine Jones, and GP Dr Ellie Cannon. Good evening to you both. What are they talking about, Cathy?
Well, I've picked out a few examples of what this list has drawn up as pointless or potentially pointless treatments. First, for example, don't be surprised if your child comes home without a plaster cast at A&E, as certain fractures, particularly wrist fractures, heal just as well with a removable splint. Secondly, little point pestering your GP for an X-ray if you have lower back pain and no other symptoms. Blood tests to confirm a woman is going through the menopause, also unnecessary if she's over 45. And finally, chemotherapy. Once cancer is terminal, a cure isn't possible, it's time to have a conversation about withdrawing the chemotherapy to improve the quality of life. And that's really the whole point of this initiative. It's about starting the conversations between a doctor and a patient.
Is it a conversation, Ellie, from your point of view, or is it just stating the bleeding obvious?
Well, I think it really is stating the obvious. I mean, it's quite patronising, I think, to good doctors and also to good patients. I think patients now are used to having a conversation with a doctor. I mean, for example, the chemotherapy and end-of-life discussion, I mean, that is a discussion that goes on every day in palliative care circumstances.
Yeah, so should it be there in black and white as a sort
of,
this is a waste of money?
Does it need to be? I suppose, does it need to be? Is that because there's a lack of consistency around the country amongst different doctors, amongst different GP surgeries? It does seem quite obvious. We don't do blood tests to check the menopause. We don't do X-rays for back pain. Maybe they do in other places, I don't know.
I mean, you say it's patronising to good doctors. Not all doctors are good, so maybe they do need a bit of a helping hand. The other thing, and this is a point being made by a viewer after we mentioned this story at 5 o'clock, and it's a very good one. They've written in to say that their family member was suffering with lower back pain, which is one of the symptoms specified here as not needing an X-ray. Yeah. After checks, it turned out to be a form of cancer. Yeah. So sometimes these seemingly pointless procedures find something else.
Sure, but these are only ever guidelines, and, you know, a doctor looks at people holistically, so it's possible in that situation that their relative said a specific thing that made the doctor realise they need an X-ray.
Cathy, a conversation worth having, but is it also to do with money saving, perhaps?
Well, that's a suspicion, of course, immediately when you hear something about the NHS and doing less. But actually, these lists compiled began in America. It's something that started there. Lots of countries use them now. We've now decided to have our own list. So in this case, I'd like to be generous and say it's actually much more to do with a global problem of over-medicalisation we're all guilty of.
All right. And making lists that sometimes people just don't follow. That's a fairly common affliction. Thank you both very much indeed. Still to come on 5 News tonight. How heading a football can affect someone's brain and their memory. And the little girl removed from the womb for a life-saving operation before being put back in to be born again. It's an incredible story. It's coming up after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News Tonight. Theresa May has offered to involve Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in regular formal talks on Brexit. The Prime Minister's met the leaders of the devolved nations at Downing Street, but Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, described the talks as deeply frustrating. The leaders are concerned about the impact of a so-called hard Brexit, which would see the United Kingdom leave the single market. Our political editor, Andy Bell, has more now.
The UK has voted to leave the EU, but of course it's not that simple. The devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland all have their own demands and want their say in just how we leave. So today, for the first time since the referendum, all those leaders from the different parts of the UK headed into Downing Street to see what Theresa May had to say to them. This single photograph is all we have of what at times was a tense meeting. The Scottish First Minister wants a direct role in the talks with the EU and the right for Scotland to stay part of the European single market after Brexit. The Welsh Government wants much the same, even though Wales, unlike Scotland, voted to leave the EU. The government in Northern Ireland is split, with the Unionist First Minister backing Brexit and the Republican Deputy First Minister wanting a special status for Northern Ireland, allowing it to remain in the single market. They were offered a new forum to take their concerns directly to the Minister in charge of Brexit, David Davis. But for the most part, they were not impressed, especially Scotland's First Minister, who's talking again about an independence referendum.
If we end up having a UK government slamming the door in our face, failing to recognise Scotland as part of an equal partnership, which we were always told we were, then I'm not prepared to see Scotland driven off a Brexit cliff edge with all the implications for our economy without at least giving Scotland the option to choose something different.
Theresa May was later in Parliament insisting she would listen to the devolved governments, but warning of the dangers of another independence vote.
Scotland has more imports and trade arrangements with the rest of the United Kingdom than it does with the European Union. Its first and foremost desire should be to remain part of the United Kingdom.
Not much life in the union flag today. In number 10, they must be careful that in leaving one union, they don't close the door on another.
Andy, do you think that the Prime Minister's managed to ease any of the other leaders' concerns today?
Not really, Matt. No, I mean, Arlene Foster, who is the First Minister of Northern Ireland, who supports Brexit, I think that she's on the same wavelength as Theresa May. But the others who went in there unhappy really came out not very reassured. The phrase you kept hearing from people like Carwyn Jones, the First Minister of Wales, Nicola Sturgeon, was that the jury is still out. In other words, it's all very well for Theresa May to say, well, look, you can get in touch with David Davis and make sure that your concerns are being heard. It's one thing to say that. What they really want to be reassured is that they really will have a direct input into the negotiations that Theresa May then carries out with the EU. But at this stage, I have to say, it doesn't seem that that's very likely to happen. It's a very difficult circle to square. Nicola Sturgeon said to me, she said that she had no more idea after the meeting today than she had before of what exactly Theresa May's negotiating position is with the EU. Just one thing, though, the word back from the Prime Minister's official spokesman was it's all very well these devolved governments wanted to have their view. They mustn't do anything that will undermine the UK's negotiating position with the Europeans.
Andy, thanks very much indeed. A Christian charity says they're dealing with a number of cases where children want to transition from being a girl to a boy or vice versa and are being supported by their local authority against the wishes of their parents. Christian Concern says the rights of the parents are being eroded as society becomes more accepting of transgender rights. With me now are Lynn Cummings and her son Jamie Bennett. Now, Jamie transitioned from being a girl to a boy at the age of 15 with the support of his family. And also with us is Susie Green, CEO of the charity Mermaids, which supports families affected by gender identity issues. Good evening to you all. Jamie, when did you first know that you wanted to change from being a girl to a boy?
I think it was about 6 or 7. I had my hair cut short. It was a bit of a shock to my mum. She went in the sunbeds and then came out, and there's just this one on the side and short spiky on top. So, yeah, just stemmed from there.
You didn't even know what haircut you were asking for? OK, no. So the long hair had gone?
Yeah, just all got chopped off.
And that got you thinking more about your feelings?
It was more like it felt normal to be doing what I was doing, like a short hair. It felt normal to be dressing more like a boy and doing more stereotypical boy things.
Lynn, when did you then realise that this was Jamie's normal?
Quite soon after, because none of the girls called for him. It was always the lads that knocked on for Jamie to come and play out and things. So it was play football, cricket, attending a couple of football matches and things. So it was just, that was him.
So now, sometimes parents in that situation might assume it's sexuality, maybe, you know, something around that. But when did you then realise it was actually perhaps one step further, that Jamie wanted to become a boy?
When we taught, probably towards year 6, year 7, leaving junior school, going on to senior school, it was more prevalent that his development, he just wasn't happy in his own body.
What kind of support did you get, not from your mum and your family, but outside of the home, from local authority, for example, and medical professionals?
Well, I first went to my GP when I was in year 6, so you're about 11 then, and he said nothing could happen till you're 18. So
Is that correct?
No. So I had no support whatsoever throughout high school and everything. I went downhill. So it was depression, anxiety, anger problems, everything. It just spiraled out of control for a while because I had no support around me whatsoever.
Is this quite common then, that people, medical professionals included, are learning all the time about what is, well, a little-known subject at this point?
Absolutely. And the thing is that what we want is the GPs who are willing to learn, who will go, I maybe don't know about this, but I'll go off and find out. The sorts of doctors that obviously that Jamie encountered was a doctor who said, no, you can't do anything until you're 18. He didn't even attempt to find out whether or not there was any possibility of any support out there.
So with that in mind, Susie, do Christian Concern have a point, perhaps, that parents' views on this are being eroded by other people who might mean well, but they're not doing it in the right way?
I don't really think so. I think because their point of view is actually that parents should be able to control what their children do and the steps that they take in terms of realising their own identity. And I don't think that's right. I think that one of the things about being a parent is that your initial responsibility is to look after your child and make sure their best interests are taken to heart.
And, you know, you'd assume then a lot of this is to do with lack of education on people's part, but then it's something they won't necessarily learn about until they have to come face-to-face with the situation. What would you say to other parents who might think this is something they could come up against? Is it ambiguous, or is it quite clear that in Jamie's case, it was obvious what needed to happen?
It was obvious, yeah. And as they develop, follow the child's lead, let them lead the way. Each child develops so differently, and albeit baby steps, it's there, and just let them lead the way, and do a bit of internet searching and get in touch with charity. Mermaids Charity is a supportive charity for children and families of transgender, and get in touch.
Baby steps, because they're always your baby.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much indeed. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the singer Pete Burns has died at the age of 57. He was, of course, famous for singing Dead or Alive. He died on Sunday after suffering a cardiac arrest. A statement from his management said, "It is with great sadness, the greatest sadness, that we have to break the tragic news that our beloved Pete Burns died suddenly yesterday." It added, all of his family and friends are devastated by the loss of our special star. That's Pete Burns, who's died at the age of just 57. Now, footballers who head the ball could be damaging their brains. A new study's found significant changes in brain function for 24 hours after players headed the ball in training. It's after campaigners called for more research into the subject, as Simon Viger explains.
Good ground here. It's a terrific cross for Ibrahimovic to attack.
From the weekend's big match in the Premier League to the local Park League, you are taught to use your head. But nagging doubts are turning to real concern following a new study from the University of Stirling. It showed headers caused an instant change to brain function. After just one session, the changes were temporary. But what about a lifetime? In 2002, an inquest ruled that West Bromwich Albion legend Jeff Astle was killed by a degenerative brain disease caused by heading heavy, old-school footballs.
It really is unforgivable for footballing authorities to ignore the fact that, you know, my dad had died and the reasons why he died because of fear of what it might be doing to the game.
As far as you're concerned, this is a ticking time bomb, and
Absolutely.
they're ignoring it.
Absolutely. I have no doubt about that whatsoever.
Footballs aren't so heavy now, but that appears to be irrelevant after the results from the new memory tests.
It is certainly sufficient evidence to say we need to be taking this issue seriously, we need to be investing in studies, and we need to understand the issue to a much greater extent than we do.
It may seem over the top, but in the United States, under-10s are banned from heading. Here, the Jeff Astle Foundation wants much more research and much more support for retired footballers.
I have this huge weight on my shoulder now because there's so many people depending on us, you know, and I won't give in for Dad and I won't give in for them. You know, I won't, because I know exactly, you know, what they're going through. We've done that. I've got the T-shirt. I've seen what happened to my dad, and it's just brutal. It's devastating. So we do it for them. We do it for them.
Footballers would never put themselves in the same bracket as boxers or rugby players, but the beautiful game is now having to face some ugly truths. Simon Viger, 5 News.
Finally, the little girl in America who has been born twice. Linley Bomer was taken out of the womb for a life-saving operation before being placed back inside her mum. Minnie Stevenson takes up the story.
Little Linley has not one, but 2 birthdays. While Margaret Bomer's baby might have been born in June, she made a brief appearance into the world much earlier than that. During a routine ultrasound, doctors discovered a tumour on the unborn baby, and operating was the only way of saving her.
We knew that if we didn't choose the option of emergency surgery that night, that within a day or so she would pass.
At 16 weeks, doctors told Linley's parents she had a rare tumour growing on her spine. By 23 weeks, her heart began to fail, so surgeons had to operate, removing her from the womb for 20 minutes. After the operation, doctors then returned the baby to continue growing inside her mum, and she was born again at 36 weeks.
It was her second birth, basically. It was a relief to finally see her and to see that she had made it through. After the open fetal surgery, her heart had time to heal while I was still pregnant with her. So she has no heart issues now and is doing amazing.
Her condition is almost always possible to treat on a newborn, but when it's detected before birth, survival is rare. But Linley went on to have a healthy delivery into the world over 12 weeks later. Doctors have called the risky operation a miracle, to be born not once, but twice. This baby girl now has a life of double birthdays ahead of her. Minnie Stevenson, 5 News.
Incredible. That's it from us. Sean Welby is here with the next, and Sam Naz has updates. Bye for now.